What's going on, guys, and welcome to another episode of Smash JT. I wanted to get to this story a couple days ago, but holy crap, it has been a busy week in gaming news. The future is bloodless. China bans blood in video games. This officially launched first on Gamasutra, and they go through some of the new regulations happening in China right now. Typically, it's not that big of a deal when talking about other countries and regulations and what they're doing, but China's a little bit different, seeing as they're such a gigantic worldwide economy, and their decisions that they've enacted immediately here could change the entire direction of the entire video game industry. JT. Think about age-olds such as Mortal Kombat, GTA, as well as modern favorites like Bowmasters and Sniper 3D. Can you imagine them without a single drop of blood in any color? Because that is what China is proposing. This article goes over the new regulations in China on what they're requiring developers to do with their video games. Now that new regulations have been passed, blood and anything players might perceive as blood is definitely forbidden. No more workarounds, and as far as we know, the law takes effect immediately. So what does that mean? Think about games in the past and how developers got around this previously. Robots were used, even if they looked like a human. When you actually shot them, they'd fall apart like a robot, and when blood would come out, it would be black, it would be oil, things like that. Many different ways developers could easily use to get around this issue. But now that China is saying anything that could be perceived as blood, that's really open to interpretation. And the problem with that is, if they're going to err on the side of caution, that means a lot of games that are getting created aren't going to be allowed in China. And if the game's not allowed in China, that's a lot of money potentially lost, especially from a AAA developer. So when they go into starting making a game, the actual game creation process, they're going to hit the ground running, starting from scratch, saying, okay, we can't make a game with this in mind because then we can't sell it in China. So from the drawing board, games are going to be quite a bit more tame and far more in a different direction than it has been going. For better or worse, whatever China ultimately decides, it's going to impact the entire worldwide video game industry. The impact of China's blood regulation on games. China's latest set of regulations will have a huge impact, not only on the action and first-person shooter genres, but on any game that uses combat effects. In some cases, you may even need to redesign certain components from scratch, which is one thing game developers don't ever want to have to do. If they can make one game across the board with very few changes outside of translation, they're going to do that because it's going to save a lot of time and ultimately a lot of money. But unfortunately, what China is doing is impacting this for the worse. How developers can deal with the ban on blood. Animate death differently. Some Chinese games with combat actions show characters slowly disintegrating when they die. This has been compliant with the new rules and accepted by players. So instead of showing a character dying, they just vanish. Okay, that seems like it's going to be a step back with technology. Go old school and use comic book style combat feedback. You can illustrate and animate what happens when a player engages in combat with written text cards or bubbles like the old Batman TV series does. I need to interject here. What the hell are we doing as a society on a global scale? Why are we scaling back the violence when countless studies have shown that violence in video games do not directly correlate to violence in real life? So the people who are making these decisions from a governmental standpoint in China are acting so archaic, it is beyond ridiculous. There is no proof of what they're doing helping anything. It's just pushing an agenda across. Use surrogate special effects for blood. Instead of liquid oozing or squirting out of a character's body when they're wounded, you can design alternative special effects. For example, have white puffs appear around the body that get shot or stabbed. Okay, so make every video game a cartoon? Toggle visual violence on or off. The option to turn your gore or violence visual SFX on or off is certainly a handy function to start building your game into now. Get inspiration from kid-friendly games. Yeah, because when you're making a violent video game, you want to get inspiration from kid-friendly games. I mean, yes, this is, as a developer, what you're going to need to focus on with the world that we're living in right now. But my problem is people are accepting of this and moving forward with it because they have to, because China has such a financial impact on the end result of a game sales that they basically have to bow to whatever China says that they need to do. Even the biggest publishers in China are redoing their top performing games in order to get in hasty compliance with new regulations. Take Tencent, China's largest game publisher. Tencent is the majority stake owner of Epic Games. As a recent example, with their battle royale shooter PUBG Mobile couldn't get approval in China. They quickly remodeled it under the name Game for Peace. Though the new game bears striking resemblance to PUBG Mobile and allows players to carry over their progress, it is fully compliant with China's new laws and has already gained monetization approval. How does Game for Peace deal with combat violence? Cleverly and creatively. Besides having no blood, opponents now wave goodbye when they're shot dead and leave a loot box behind. That's what games are turning into. It's going to be rainbows and fairies and unicorns floating around, and instead of people dying, they're just going to wave goodbye and disappear. Just like real life. What should I do if my game is already licensed in China? Even if your game is already fully licensed in China, you now run the risk of having that license withdrawn until you change the game in compliance with new rules. Oh China, how we love you so much. Looking ahead, the minutiae of China's content restrictions have developed over a period of time and come paired with an overall trend towards increasingly heavy regulation of game content. With that in mind, we can expect there to be further restrictions on the cards in the future. In summary, things that are now banned from China include blood of any color, now defined as anything that could be imagined as blood. That is something that is way too loose of a definition. Corpses, skeletons, and bones, guts and dismembered body parts, the Chinese word for kill. You can't even allude to the word kill in these games. Still, these restrictions are not impossible to work with. No, they're not. They just turn every single game into a marshmallow puff. They're not even real games anymore. They're just made for kids, young kids. They don't even allow people to enjoy video games to play them. Even grown-ass adults aren't allowed to play them. Here's an example of how we changed the models in the game Hand of Fate to comply with the Chinese regulations. So there's the heart dripping blood on the right, and it turned into a glass bottle with a white cap on the top. Oh, how nice. Yes, in some games it's not that big of a deal because it doesn't change the gameplay, but for the vast majority of teen-rated and up games, it would really change the game experience overall, which goes into the whole conversation of if video games are art or if they're not. Does China ban certain art? Yeah, I think they do, actually. But what kind of world are we living in when you're not even allowed to create something as an artist in your own vision? This is such an annoying thing to deal with as a developer. My heart, the one on the right here, truly goes out for you guys. Certainly, China's latest and very comprehensive ban on anything that could be imagined as blood impacts a lot of games, but that's no reason to shut yourself out of the Chinese market. No, that's not any reason to shut yourself out of the Chinese market. But the problem is, by fixing games and going into the game with this in mind, it's going to completely change the outcome of the vast majority of adult-oriented AAA games going forward. This is a problem for the future of the video game industry. A lot of people in the comments here are talking about how you can just go back to the old robots thing, but you need to get rid of spewing oil as blood because that could be misinterpreted possibly. There's a lot of different ways to deal with it, but I keep going back to how they want to make one unified game as a developer and they don't want to change it too much. That's going to cause a lot of added time, stress, frustration, and money to the project. So it's a lot easier just to make one single game and make it fall under worldwide standards if they can do that. It's not a good thing. The actual impact this will have on the rest of the entire world is detrimental to the future of video games. I'm saying it. That's where I stand on this issue. It's very frustrating, but hey, it's China, and China will be China. Anyways, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, you stay smashing.